You're listening to a podcast from Young Lives, a longitudinal study of poverty and inequality following the lives of 12,000 children into adulthood in Ethiopia, India, Peru and Vietnam. I'm Julia Tilford, Young Lives Head of Communications, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Alula Pankhurst, Young Lives Country Director from Ethiopia, who's here to talk about the importance of Young Lives' mixed methods approach and introduce us to the sixth wave of qualitative data collection in Ethiopia. This is being funded by the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and Irish Aid, and it gets underway shortly. Welcome, Alula.
Thank you very much.
It's fantastic that you're going to be going ahead with this next stage of the qualitative research. But before we dive into that in more detail, could you just start by explaining to the listeners what we mean by mixed methods?
Well, Young Lives is a study that combines a range of different methods, and these include both quantitative research based on surveys and qualitative research where we have much more in-depth questions and get to know the young people themselves and hear about their lives in their own words. So it's an approach that focuses on the young people's own experiences in their own words, whereas the quantitative research provides the broader picture of the trends and the statistics. A mixed methods approach like this isn't common in longitudinal research in low and middle income countries. In fact, Young Lives is quite unique in this respect. And by using this approach, Young Lives has been able both to broaden and deepen what we're able to find out about poverty and inequality.
Fantastic. Thank you. So if we've just finished the 7th round of Young Lives quantitative survey, could you just talk us through an example perhaps of where the qualitative work adds value to that quantitative survey, and perhaps a bit about the relationship between those two approaches or two methods?
Right. So there have been these 7 survey rounds, and in addition, we've gone back to the young people 5 times for the qualitative research, and we're about to do the 6th wave of qualitative research. And we can explore particular issues in much more depth in a qualitative approach. So if we take the example, for instance, of child marriage, the surveys tell us that quite a large proportion of young people, especially young women, get married as teenagers and have children before the legal age of marriage of 18. And the qualitative work can then find out what the reasons for this. So for some of them, it will have been that their parents forced them to get married early. Others made the choice to get married because that's what they wanted to do. And so we can begin to understand better what their motivations are. And we can also then see, since we're following them, we can see the consequences. Well, if a young woman, for instance, has a child when she's 16, then does that mean she drops out of education? And then does that mean she has to get married? And then what does she do about work, childcare? And we can then explore what it means. And that in turn means that we can then think about what policy implications there might be and what measures we can suggest that can support young people in facing those kinds of difficult choices, and also to see what might make that something that happens less frequently.
Thanks very much. It's interesting to hear the complementary aspect of the study. And turning our attention now, it would be great to look at the qualitative interviews you've got coming up shortly in Ethiopia. And can I ask that you just talk us through in a little bit more detail what this is going to involve?
We've been interviewing a subset of the main survey sample over many years, in 5 waves of qualitative interviewing going back to 2007. At that time, the younger cohort was 6 years old and the older cohort were 13. So over the years, we've got to know the children very well. We know about their lives, their views, about their schooling, their families, as well as their hopes for the future, and how all this has changed as they grow up. And we'll be going back to this subsample of some 60 young women and men who live in 5 different places in various regions of Ethiopia, in both urban and rural areas, to find out how they've fared since the last wave of qualitative interviewing, which goes back to 2019, and to see what they've been doing since then and their transitions from education to the work environment. But in addition to that, we'll talk to their spouses. We'll talk to the wives and husbands, and if they're not married, we'll talk to their caregivers or parents. We'll also talk to important people in the community that affect their lives, that have an important impact on their lives. So this can be in education, teachers, and it can be in the healthcare. It can be the leaders and the political leaders in the communities. And so that will give us much more of a sense of how they interact with the service provision. And we'll then get them into groups and have focus groups in which we talk to young women on their own and young men on their own, but also the older men and older women who are the same age as their parents. And what's quite innovative this particular time is that we are, in addition to that, focusing on issues to do with health, and we're going to select additional respondents beyond the qualitative sample we had in the past to focus on these issues, and we'll select them from the broader Young Lives survey sample to focus on specific topics that the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and Irish Aid have been especially interested in. And that includes mother and child health, sexual and reproductive health, mental health and disability.
That's fascinating topics that you're going to be exploring. And just there's the one thing that struck me whilst you were speaking, you've been going back to these children or young people for many years. How do you get them to open up on such personal topics?
Well, it's that trust that we've built up, particularly since our field workers have got to know them over the years and feel that they can talk about even sensitive topics and open up to them about their fears and hopes and aspirations in a way which is not possible when we haven't got to know them over many rounds. And
it's anonymised as well, am I right?
Indeed, yes. That means that they feel confident that what they talk about will not be made public in a way that that they can be identified.
And just lastly, you mentioned that it's several years now since you've last been to visit them in detail, although we've just conducted the Round 7 survey this year too. So in those intervening years, is there anything that you particularly feel might have had an impact on their lives?
Yes, indeed. This has been a very difficult period for many of these young people that have been moving from education to work, because we've had a series of crises. There was first the COVID pandemic, and then in several parts of Ethiopia we've had conflict and war, which has been very traumatic for young people. And in addition, there's been very high inflation, and this has affected young people's livelihoods and also led to youth unemployment.
So in terms of living through that, what do you expect, or what are you keen to understand about the impact of living through those crises?
Well, we're hoping to see what explains young people's resilience. What is it that makes young people able to cope better or come through those crises? For instance, is it family support? Is it peer networks? Is it the community? Is it the services that are provided? And what explains who fares better and who really struggles in those circumstances? And once we can begin to find that out, we're in a better position to make suggestions that can influence policy that will support young people to go through these difficult times.
Thank you. It sounds like you're going to find out some really important information. What we'd really like to know is, when will we find out what you find out? So when will the findings come out?
So it's quite a long process. We first of all have to design the questions, the research process, and train field workers, gain ethical approval. And then after that, we will go to the field in the early part of 2025 and then analyze the data and produce report and policy briefs by the end of 2025.
Okay, thank you. And in the meantime, how should people find out more about Young Lives and follow the story?
So as we produce our research, we will be publicizing this through the websites. There's the international website and also the Ethiopia website, and also, of course, through social media.
Yeah, so you can follow Young Lives on the main social media channels, Instagram, as well as X, LinkedIn and Facebook. And also, as Alula mentioned, head to the international website, www.younglives.org.uk. So thank you so much, Alula, for talking us through what's coming up in the next phase of this exciting study. And we look forward to hearing more when you find out what's happened next with the young people's lives.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.